looking at the map all told, what do you get? What you get is what Israel has always wanted. The claim is that Mr. Rabin and the Labor Party generally overnight became peaceniks. Well, what does the map show you? The map shows you that since the late 1960s, the Labor Party has been trying to implement what it calls the Alone Plan. The Alone Plan called for incorporating about half of the West Bank into Israel, consigning the areas of what are called dense Arab settlement to some kind of Palestinian self-rule, taking Jerusalem. Well, you can continue, but the point is quite obvious. Looking at the map, what you get is an extreme version of the Alone Plan. The Alone Plan called for incorporating approximately 50% of the West Bank. Looking at the map, they're taking about 70%. Otherwise, this is what Israel has always wanted. There has not been any concession by Israel. What there has been is effectively an Israeli triumph, a victory. The ones who concede, it seems fairly obvious, are the Palestinians. Turning now to the issue of water. What does the agreement say? Oslo II says, we'll give Palestinians a little extra water during the so-called interim period. The interim period is a 5-year period beginning from May 1994. It's a 5-year period. We'll give Palestinians a little extra water. However, it says that we have to maintain the same distribution of water between Israelis and Palestinians that existed up until the Oslo Accord. What is that distribution? Well, surprisingly, the Israelis supply let me just recall, it's not an appendix, it's called let's see. It has a schedule, Schedule 8. Turning to Schedule 8, the Israelis admit, what is the distribution? Israel gets 80% of West Bank water. Palestinians get 20% of West Bank water. Well, fair is fair. That means an Israeli consumes typically 4 times as much water as a Palestinian. You know, Israelis are fond of saying that Arabs are dirty. Well, were that the case, they would have an explanation. If Israel would stop stealing their water, maybe they could take a bath. But that's actually not the worst of it. Then we come to what the status of water will be in the final status negotiations. Israel, in all its generosity, states that we do recognize Palestinian water rights in the West Bank. Well, that's an awesome concession. Israel recognizes that Palestinians have rights to their own water. But, it says, listen closely, the ownership of water will be decided in the permanent status negotiations. So whatever rights Palestinians may have to the West Bank water, they do not include ownership, which presumably means that they will have the right to purchase it from Israel. That is, Israel now claims officially that it has the right to Palestinian water on the basis of what it calls historic usage. What is historic usage? It's a nice euphemism What it means is, having stolen Palestinian water for nearly 3 decades, Israelis now proclaim it's theirs. Proudhon would not have been surprised. As you know, he coined that famous expression, property is theft. Let's now turn to a third crucial issue, reparations. Professor Said makes what seems to me a perfectly rational point, where one operating in a rational universe, that inasmuch as Germany had to pay reparations to Jews, and Iraq, by virtue of UN resolutions, is duty-bound to pay reparations to Kuwait for what was, after all, just a several-month occupation, he asks, why aren't Israelis duty-bound to pay Palestinians reparations for a 3-decade-long occupation? It's incidentally, if I just may make a digression, a brief one, it's a remarkable fact which has gone completely unmentioned in discussion, that the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza now exceeds in length the British mandate over Palestine. It's a period of now quite, by historic standards, a substantial chunk of time has elapsed in the course of this occupation. In any case, what does Oslo II have to say about reparations? It's really well worth reading. It gives you deep insight into the generosity of heart of Israelis. First of all, of course, we're not giving Palestinians any reparations. But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it reads as follows. The newly elected Palestinian Council must accept all liabilities and obligations arising with regard to acts or omissions which occurred in the course of Israel's rule. So whatever ravages Israel committed in the course of the occupation, the Palestinian Council must now accept all liabilities and obligations. In what I call the special chutzpah clause of Oslo II, chutzpah, as some of you may know, is a Yiddish term for audacity or nerve or brass. It says as follows. Say a Palestinian takes Israel to court on the grounds that their home was broken, their home was blown up, their land was stolen, they were cheated out of their social insurance benefits when they worked in Israel. Say one of them goes to any court, a Palestinian court, an Israeli court, or even a world forum, suing for damages. Oslo II says, the Palestinian administration, quote, must immediately reimburse Israel the full amount of any award that is made against Israel by any court or tribunal for its past crimes. So if any court finds Israel guilty and Israel must pay up, the Palestinian Council must immediately reimburse Israel the full account. Now I suspect in the whole history of peace agreements and non-peace agreements, that must be truly a first. Now there's an interesting comparison here which I'll return to. At the end of the discussion. Namely, compare the behavior of the racist, cold-hearted South African government. When South Africa withdrew from parts of the territory it conquered and created these areas of self-rule, eventually called Bantustans. In other words, when it pretty much did exactly what Israel is presently doing, South Africa, however cold-hearted, however racist, and nobody would deny either, continued to foot the bill for all Bantustan budgets to the tune of between 60 and 80%. The Transkei budget, 60 to 80% was paid for by South Africa. The Venda budget, the Bophuthatswana budget, the KwaZulu budget, they were all completely subsidized by South Africa. And compare their behavior with Israel's. Not only does Israel refuse to give a cent to make Gaza, which it systematically destroyed over 30 years, not only does it refuse to give them a cent to make Gaza functional, but it demands an immediate reimbursement if anyone should find them guilty of any crime in the course of their occupation. Let's now turn to the issue of sovereignty. Nowhere in Oslo II will you find the word withdrawal. There is no withdrawal from the West Bank because, as you see from the map, you can't withdraw from what's already part of you. The map, there's only a unitary entity. What Oslo II refers to exclusively is redeployment. They have redeployed their troops. The Palestinian Council's purview excludes, according to Oslo II, Jerusalem, settlements, military locations, refugees, borders, foreign relations, and Israelis. That's all outside the sovereignty of the Palestinians as well. Furthermore, Israel retains, listen closely, and you'll get a clear sense of what Palestinian sovereignty consists of. Israel retains full criminal jurisdiction over offenses committed anywhere in the West Bank by Israelis or against Israel or an Israeli. All of that is outside the purview of Palestinians. Regarding internal Palestinian affairs, a council cannot amend or abrogate any existing laws or military orders without Israel's acquiescence. So much has Israel proscribed Palestinian quote-unquote sovereignty, because it's quite obvious it consists of exactly nothing. So much has Israel prescribed Palestinian sovereignty that there's even a clause in Oslo II, which again, I dare say, is probably unprecedented in the history of peace and even war-making. There's a clause which states that postage stamps, Palestinian postage stamps, quote, shall include only the terms the Palestinian Council or the Palestinian Authority. They do not even have any rights over the wording of their postage stamps. Let's turn now to the question of security. What rights do Palestinians have there? They have no right over external security. That's all Israel's. They have no right over security of Israelis. That also is Israel's responsibility. Thus, in the name of security, Israel is free to pursue any Palestinian anywhere in the West Bank. Let's look at the other side. Israel has control over external security. It has control over all internal security relating to Palestinians. What rights do Palestinians have in the West Bank? Well, first of all, Oslo II is very explicit. They are duty bound, according to Oslo II, to protect Israeli settlers and Israeli settlements. However, the Palestinian police, let me quote, shall under no circumstances apprehend or place in custody or prison any Israeli. They have to defend and protect the settlers. They have to defend and protect the settlements. The settlers and settlements which up until Oslo I were illegal under international law, but they can't so much as lay a finger on any settler who assaults, murders, or maims them. Furthermore, Israel has total control over the closing and opening of crossing points to the West Bank and Gaza. I would want to add, or I should point out, that all of Mr. Arafat's protestations that Israel is violating the accords when it enters Palestinian areas, as it did with Yahya Ayash, when it closes checkpoints, all of his protestations are flat out false. In that respect, Israel is on very solid legal ground. The agreement that the PLO signed gave over all of those rights to Israel. Israel retains responsibility for security at the border crossings to the West Bank and Gaza. Accordingly, it has the right, explicitly in Oslo II, to detain or deny passage to any person entering through the Palestinian wing, and enjoys exclusive responsibility for all persons entering through the Israeli wing. In other words, it has total control and rights over who enters and who leaves the West Bank and Gaza. Said contemptuously dismisses these arrangements as a one-sided farce. That's not exactly true, though. According to Oslo II, Palestinians get to hoist their flag at the Palestinian entrance. And there are 3 pages, I kid you not, pages 92 through 6, but it's 3 full pages, of the Oslo II Accord delineating 3 different statuses of PLO VIPs who will have special treatment at the border crossings. You have a good sense of where Mr. Arafat and his cronies invested their efforts and where they didn't. 3 pages on VIPs, and I kid you not, I think I actually have the accord. It's so shameful. You really want to cry. Your heart sinks when you look at it. The very last page of the accord, page 314, has a few lines about Palestinian prisoners. 3 pages about VIP status, and the last page is on the Palestinian prisoners. Lastly, the question of land. The accord calls for Israeli redeployment from 30% of the West Bank, the areas which are represented in yellow and brown here. The accord says that in the future there will be further redeployments, but it doesn't specify how much or where. Even more interesting than that, however, is in the 30% that Israel redeployed from, the accord explicitly states that Israel still has legal rights to the 30%, which means on the issue of land, they have absolutely conceded zero. Professor Chomsky makes the point in one of his articles that Israel only conceded 1 to 3%, namely the areas called Area A. Those are the areas in brown, the major cities. In fact, we both discovered subsequently they didn't even concede 1 to 3%, because the Accord says in its multiple appendices and annexes, if you search through them, that Israel even claims legal rights to the lousy 1 to 3% that they conceded. And what does the map look like all told? It's quite remarkable. Some of you, is there anyone here from South Africa? Just out of curiosity? No? Because this is exactly what the South African map looked like. The Bantustans, each of them, Transkei, Venda, Bophuthatswana, and so forth, each of them consisted of major and minor fragments surrounded by white settlements. The Bantustans were not contiguous areas. And this is what Israel created, almost a caricature of the South African Bantustans. There are about, I tried to count them, it's impossible. I mean, it's possible, but it was too time-consuming. All of these little things here, these little blotches, it's sort of like the West Bank broke out in a rash. These are the areas of more or less Palestinian control. And there are about 150 of them. I gave up counting after around 110 because it seemed like a pointless exercise. KwaZulu consisted, that was the one that was led by Chief Buthelezi, it consisted of about 40 fragments. So it's more or less in line with the South African precedent, to which I'll return presently. Before I do so, however, an obvious question arises. Namely, why did Palestinians get such a pitiful deal at Oslo, whereas on the Egyptian front there was a full withdrawal in the Camp David Accord? And it really is a question worth pondering. If you look at the Camp David Accord, or let's just backtrack a little, beginning in 1971, Sadat, the president of Egypt, offered Israel a full peace in exchange for a full Israeli withdrawal from the Sinai. Similarly, the Palestinians, since the mid-1970s, have been offering Israel a full peace in exchange for a full Israeli withdrawal from the West Bank and Gaza. And then the obvious question arises. Why did Egypt get the full withdrawal and the Palestinians got a full zero? Some people would want to claim security, that there are basic security issues on the West Bank which didn't arise in the case of Egypt and the Sinai. That, alas, the historical record shows, is flat out false. Because you must remember that the war in 1967 did not break out on the Palestinian-Jordanian front. It broke out on the Egyptian front, in the Sinai. And Israel maintained from 1967 to 1973 that it has fundamental strategic interests in the Sinai, in particular the area called Sharm el-Sheikh, which it can never, under any circumstances, even a full treaty, abandon. As the famous remark of Moshe Dayan put it, we'd prefer Sharm el-Sheikh without peace to peace without Sharm el-Sheikh. So Israel was claiming on the Egyptian front also basic security interests